John Wayne Gacy, March 17th, 1942, May 10th, 1994, was an American serial killer and pederast who raped, tortured, and murdered at least 33 young men and boys. Gacy regularly performed at children's hospitals and charitable events as Pogo the Clown or Patches the Clown, personas he had devised. He became known as the Killer Clown due to his public services as a clown prior to the discovery of his crimes. Gacy committed all of his murders inside his ranch house near Norridge, a village near Norwood Park Township, metropolitan Chicago, Illinois. Typically, he would lure a victim to his home and dupe him into donning handcuffs on the pretext of demonstrating a magic trick. He would then rape and torture his captive before killing him by either asphyxiation or strangulation with a garrote. 26 victims were buried in the crawl space of his home, and 3 others were buried somewhere on his property. 4 were discarded in the Des Plaines River. Gacy was convicted of the sodomy of a teenage boy in Waterloo, Iowa in 1968 and was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, but served 18 months. He murdered his first victim in 1972 and murdered twice more by the end of 1975, and murdered at least 30 subsequent victims after his divorce from his second wife in 1976. The investigation into the disappearance of Des Plaines teenager Robert Peace led to Gacy's arrest in December 21st, 1978. His conviction for 33 murders by one individual then covered the most homicides in the United States legal history. Gacy was sentenced to death on March 13th, 1980, on death row at Menard Correctional Center. He spent much of his time painting. He was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center on May 10th, 1994. John Wayne Gacy was born in Chicago, Illinois on March 17th, 1942. The second child and only son of John Stanley Gacy, 1990 to 1969, and Marion Elaine Robinson, 1908 to 1989. His father was an auto repair machinist and World War I veteran, and his mother was a homemaker. Gacy was of Polish and Danish ancestry, and his family was Catholic. His paternal grandparents, who spelled the family name Katza or Kaka, had immigrated to the United States from Poland, then part of Germany, of the German state Russia. Childhood. Gacy was close to his mother and 2 sisters, but endured a difficult relationship with his father, an alcoholic who was physically abusive to his family. His father also belittled him, calling him dumb and stupid, and comparing him unfavorably with his sisters. One of Gacy's earliest memories was of his father beating him with a leather belt for accidentally disarranging components of a car engine he had assembled. His mother tried to shield her son from his father's abuse, which only resulted in accusations that he was a sissy and a mama's boy who would probably grow up queer. Despite his mistreatment, however, Gacy still loved his father, but he felt that he was never good enough in his father's eyes. In 1949, Gacy's father was informed that his son and another boy had been caught sexually fondling a young girl. His father whipped him with a razor strop as punishment. The same year, a family friend and contractor would sometimes molest Gacy in his truck. Gacy never told his father about this, afraid that his father would blame him. Gacy was an overweight and unathletic child. Because of a heart condition, he was told to avoid all sports at school. During 4th grade, Gacy began to experience blackouts. He was hospitalized on occasion because of these episodes, and also in 1957 for a burst appendix. Gacy later estimated that between the ages of 14 and 18, he spent almost a year in a hospital and attributed the decline of his grades to missing school. His father suspected these episodes were an effort to gain sympathy and attention, and openly accused his son of faking the condition as Gacy lay in a hospital bed. Although his mother, sisters, and a few friends never doubted his illness, Gacy's medical condition was never conclusively diagnosed. One of Gacy's friends in high school recalled several instances when his father ridiculed or beat his son without provocation. On one occasion in 1957, he witnessed Gacy's father emerging drunk from the family basement to begin belittling, then hitting his son for no apparent reason. Gacy's mother attempted to intervene, as her son simply put up his hands to defend himself. According to the friend, Gacy never struck his father back during these altercations. Career origins. In 1960, at age 18, Gacy became involved in politics, working as an assistant precinct captain for a Democratic Party candidate in his neighborhood. This led to more criticism from his father, who accused his son of being a patsy. Gacy later speculated his decision to become involved in politics was actually to seek the acceptance from others that he never received from his father. The same year Gacy's political movement began. His father bought him a car. He kept the vehicle's title in his own name until Gacy had finished paying for it. These monthly payments took several years for him to complete. His father would confiscate the keys to the vehicle if Gacy did not do as he said. In 1962, Gacy purchased an extra set of keys from his father. After his father confiscated the original set. In response, his father removed the distributor cap, keeping the component for 3 days. Gacy recalled he felt totally sick and drained after this incident. Las Vegas. Hours after his father replaced the distributor cap, Gacy left home and drove to Las Vegas, Nevada. He found work within the ambulance service before he was transferred to work as an attendant at Paul Mortuary. As a mortuary attendant, Gacy slept on a cot behind the embalming room. He worked there for 3 months, observing morticians embalming dead bodies. Gacy later confessed that one evening, while alone, he had clambered into the coffin of a deceased teenage male, embracing and caressing the body before experiencing a sense of shock. This prompted Gacy to call his mother the next day and asked whether his father would allow him to return home. His father agreed, and the same day he drove back to Chicago. Springfield. On returning home, Gacy enrolled at Northwestern Business College, despite having failed to graduate from high school. He graduated in 1963 and took a management trainee position with the Nunn-Bush Shoe Company. In 1964, the shoe company transferred him to Springfield, Illinois to work as a salesman and eventually promoted him to manager of his department. In March of that year, he became engaged to Marilyn Myers, a coworker. During their courtship, Gacy joined the local Jaycees and worked tirelessly for them. Being named Key Man in April 1964. That same year, he had his second homosexual experience. According to Gacy, after one of his colleagues in the Springfield Jaycees piled him with drinks and invited him to spend the evening on his sofa, he agreed. The colleague then performed oral sex on him while he was drunk. By 1965, Gacy had risen to the position of vice president of the Springfield Jaycees. The same year, he was named the third most outstanding Jaycee in the state of Illinois. KFC manager. After a 6-month courtship, Gacy and Myers married in September 1964. Marilyn's father subsequently purchased 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. The couple moved there so Gacy could manage the restaurants, with the understanding that they would move to Marilyn's parents' former home, which had been vacated for the couple. The offer was lucrative. Gacy would receive $15,000 per year, the equivalent of about $134,550 as of 2022, plus a share of the restaurant's profits. Following the obligatory completion of a management course, Gacy relocated to Waterloo with his wife. He opened a club in his basement where his employees would drink alcohol and play pool. Although Gacy employed teenagers of both sexes at his restaurants, he socialized only with young men. Gacy gave many of them alcohol before he made sexual advances. If they rebuffed him, he would claim his advances were simply jokes or a test of morals. Gacy's wife gave birth to a son in February 1966 and a daughter in March 1967. Gacy later described the spirit brother of his life as perfect. He had finally earned his father's approval when Gacy's parents paid a visit in July 1966. His father privately apologized for the physical and emotional abuse he had inflicted throughout his son's childhood and adolescence before happily saying, "Son, I was wrong about you," as he shook Gacy's hand. Waterloo, Gacy joined the local Gacy's chapter, regularly offering extended hours to the organization. In addition to the 12 and 14-hour days he worked managing the 3 KFC restaurants. At meetings, Gacy provided fried chicken and insisted on being called Colonel. Colonel is how you say it, I'm not sure. He and other Waterloo JCs were also deeply involved in wife swapping, prostitution, pornography, and drug use. Although Gacy was considered ambitious and something of a braggart, the JCs held him in high regards for his fundraising work, and in 1967 named him Outstanding Vice President of the Waterloo JCs. The same year, Gacy served on the board of directors. Assault on Donald Voorhees. In August 1967, Gacy sexually assaulted 15-year-old Donald Voorhees, the son of a fellow JC. Gacy lured Voorhees to his house upon the promise of showing him heterosexual stag films regularly played at JC events. Gacy piled Voorhees with alcohol, allowing him to watch a stag movie, and persuaded him to engage in mutual oral sex, adding, "You have to have sex with a man before you can start having sex with a woman." Over the following months, Gacy similarly abused several other youths, including one whom he encouraged to have sex with his own wife before blackmailing him into performing oral sex on him. Gacy tricked several teenagers into believing he was commissioned to conduct homosexual experiments in the interest of scientific research and paid them up to $50 each. Excuse me. In March 1968, Voorhees reported to his father that Gacy had sexually assaulted him. Voorhees Sr. immediately informed the police, who arrested Gacy and subsequently charged him with performing oral sodomy on Voorhees and the attempted assault of 16-year-old Edward Lynch. Gacy vehemently denied the charges and demanded to take a polygraph test. The results indicated Gacy was nervous when he denied any wrongdoing in relation to both young men. Gacy publicly denied any wrongdoing and instead insisted the charges against him were politically motivated. Voorhees Sr. had opposed Gacy's nomination for appointment as president of the Iowa Jaycees. Several fellow Jaycees found Gacy's story credible and rallied to his support. However, on May 10, 1968, Gacy was indicted on the sodomy charge. Witness intimidation. On August 30th, 1968, Gacy persuaded one of his employees, 18-year-old Russell Schroeder, to physically assault Voorhees in the effort to discourage the boy from testifying against him in court. Gacy promised to pay Schroeder $300. Schroeder agreed, and in early September lured Voorhees into an isolated country park, sprayed mace in his eyes, then beat him. Voorhees escaped and reported the assault to police, identifying Schroeder as his attacker. They arrested him the following day, while initially denying any involvement. Schroeder soon confessed to assaulting Voorhees, indicating he had done so at Gacy's request. Police arrested Gacy and laid an additional charge of hiring Schroeder to assault and intimidate Voorhees against him. On September 12th, Gacy was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation at the psychiatric hospital of the University of Iowa. 2 doctors examined him over a period of 17 days before concluding that he had an antisocial personality disorder, the clinical term for sociopathy and psychopathy, and was unlikely to benefit from any therapy or medical treatment, and that his behavior was likely to bring him into repeated conflict with society. The doctors concluded that he was mentally competent to stand trial. Conviction and imprisonment. On November 7, 1968, Gacy pleaded guilty to 1 count of sodomy in relation to Voorhees, but not guilty to the charges related to other youths. Gacy claimed Voorhees had offered himself to him and that he had acted out of curiosity. His story was not believed. Gacy was convicted of sodomy on December 3rd and sentenced to 10 years imprisonment to be served at the Anamosa State Penitentiary. That same day, Gacy's wife petitioned for divorce, requesting she be awarded the couple's home and property, sole custody of their 2 children, and alimony. The court ruled in her favor, and the divorce was finalized on September 18, 1969. Gacy never saw his first wife or children again. During his incarceration in the Anamosa State Penitentiary, Gacy rapidly acquired a reputation as a model prisoner. Within months of his arrival, he had risen to the position of head cook. He also joined the inmate Gacy chapter and increased its membership from 50 to 650 men in less than 18 months. Where am I? He is known to have secured an increase in the inmates' daily pay in the prison mess hall and to have supervised several projects to improve conditions for inmates in the prison. By the summer of 1969, Gacy had overseen the installation of a miniature golf course in the prison recreation yard. In June 1969, Gacy was denied parole. To prepare for a second scheduled parole hearing in May 1970, he completed 16 high school courses, for which he obtained his diploma in November 1969. On Christmas Day 1969, Gacy's father died from cirrhosis of the liver. When informed of his father's death, Gacy collapsed to the floor, sobbing. His request for supervised compassionate leave to attend the funeral was denied. Returned to Chicago, Gacy was granted parole with 12 months probation on June 18, 1970. After having served 18 months of his 10-year sentence, conditions of his probation included that Gacy relocate to Chicago to live with his mother and that he must observe a 10 p.m. curfew. On his release, Gacy told friend and fellow J.C. Clarence Lane, who picked him up from the prison and had remained steadfast in his belief of Gacy's innocence, that he would never go back to jail, and that he intended to reestablish himself in Waterloo. However, within 24 hours of his release, Gacy had relocated to Chicago. He arrived there on June 19th, and shortly thereafter obtained a job as a short-order cook in a restaurant. On February 12, 1971, Gacy was charged with sexually assaulting a teenage boy who claimed that he had lured him into his car at Chicago's Greyhound bus terminal and driven him to his home, where he had attempted to force the boy into sex. The court dismissed his complaint when the boy failed to appear. On June 22nd, Gacy was arrested and charged with aggravated sexual battery and reckless conduct. The arrest was in response to a complaint filed by a youth who claimed that Gacy had flashed a sheriff's badge, lured him into his car, and forced him to perform oral sex. These charges were dropped after the complainant attempted to blackmail Gacy. The Iowa Board of Parole did not learn of these incidents, and 8 months later, in October 1971, Gacy's parole ended. The following month, records of Gacy's previous criminal convictions were sealed. 8,213 West Somerdale Avenue, or should I call it 8213 West Somerdale Avenue. With financial assistance from his mother, Gacy bought a ranch house near the village of Norridge in Norwood Park Township, an unincorporated area of 8213 West Somerdale Avenue until his arrest in December 1978. And according to Gacy, committed all his murders there. Gacy was active in his local community and helpful towards his neighbors. He willingly loaned his construction tools and plowed snow from neighborhood walks free of charge. Between 1974 and 1978, he hosted annual summer parties, each devoted to a particular theme. These events were attended by up to 400 people, including politicians. Second marriage and divorce. In August 1971, shortly after Gacy and his mother moved into the house, he became engaged to Carol Hoff, whom he had briefly dated in high school. They were married on July 1st, 1972. Carol and her two young daughters from a previous marriage moved into Gacy's home soon after the couple announced their engagement. His mother moved out of the house shortly before the wedding. By 1975, Gacy had told his wife that he was bisexual. After the couple had sex on Mother's Day that year, he informed her this would be the last time he would ever have sex. He began spending most evenings away from home, only to return in the early hours of the morning with the excuse that he had been working late. Carol observed Gacy's bringing the teenage boys into the garage in the early hours and also found gay pornography and men's wallets and identification inside the house. When she confronted Gacy about who these items belonged to, he informed her angrily that it was none of her business. Following a heated argument when she failed to balance a checkbook correctly in 1975, Carol asked Gacy for a divorce. He agreed to his wife's request, although by mutual consent, she continued to live at the West Somerdale house until February 1976, when she and her daughters moved into their own apartment. 1 month later, on March 2nd, the Gacy's divorce decreed upon the false grounds of Gacy's infidelity with women was finalized. Pdm Contractors. In 1971, Gacy established a part-time construction business, Pdm Contractors. The initials PDM were for painting, decorating, and maintenance. With the approval of his probation officer, Gacy worked evenings on his construction contracts while working as a cook during the day. Initially, he undertook minor repair work such as sign writing, pouring concrete, and decorating, but later expanded to include projects such as interior design, remodeling, installation, assembly, and landscaping. In mid-1973, Gacy quit his job as a cook so he could commit fully to his construction business. By 1975, PDM was expanding rapidly, and Gacy was working up to 16 hours per day. In March 1977, he became a supervisor for PE Systems, a firm specializing in the remodeling of drugstores. Between PE Systems and PDM, Gacy worked on up to 4 projects simultaneously and frequently traveled to other states. By 1978, PDM's total revenue was $200,000. Clown. membership in a local moose club, Gacy became aware of a Jolly Joker clown club whose members regularly performed at fundraising events and parades in addition to voluntarily entertaining hospitalized children. In late 1975, Gacy joined the clown club and created his own clown characters Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown, devising his own makeup and costumes. He described Pogo as a happy clown, whereas Patches was a more serious character rather. Gacy seldom earned money from his performances and later said that acting as a clown allowed him to regress into childhood. He performed as both Pogo and Patches at numerous local parties, political charitable functions, political functions, and children's hospitals. Sometimes Gacy would remain in his clowning garb after a performance and briefly drink at a local bar before returning home. Gacy's voluntary public service as a clown throughout the years of his murders led him to being known as the Killer Clown. Employees. Much of PDM's workforce consisted of high school students and young men. Gacy would often proposition his workers for sex or insist on sexual favors in return for acts such as lending his vehicles, financial assistance, or promotions. Gacy also claimed to own guns, once telling an employee, "Do you know how easy it would be to get one of my guns and kill you? And how easy it would be to get rid of the body." In 1973, Gacy and a teenage employee traveled to Florida to view a property Gacy had purchased. On the first night in Florida, Gacy raped the employee in their hotel room. After returning to Chicago, his employee drove to Gacy's house and beat him in his yard. Gacy told his wife that he had been attacked for refusing to pay him for poor quality painting work. In May 1975, Gacy hired 15-year-old Anthony Antonucci. After months later, he went to Antonucci's home, knowing the youth had injured his foot in an accident the previous day. The two drank a bottle of wine and then watched a heterosexual stag film where Gacy wrestled Antonucci to the floor and cuffed his hands behind his back. One cuff was loose and Antonucci freed his arm while Gacy was out of the room. When Gacy returned, Antonucci, a high school wrestler, pounced on him. He wrestled Gacy to the floor, obtained possession of the handcuff key, and cuffed Gacy's hands behind his back. At first, Gacy threatened Antonucci, then calmed down and promised to leave if he would remove the handcuffs. Antonucci agreed and Gacy left. Antonucci later recalled that Gacy told him, "Not only are you the only one who got out of the cuffs, you got them on me." On July 26, 1976, Gacy picked up 18-year-old David Graham as he hitchhiked on Elston Avenue. Gacy offered him a job with Pdm, and he began work the same evening. On August 21st, Graham moved into his house. On the next day, Graham and Gacy had several drinks to celebrate his 19th birthday, with Gacy dressed as Pogo. Gacy conned Graham corresponding handcuffs, his wrists cuffed in front of his body rather than behind. He swung Graham around while holding the chain linking the cuffs. Then said he intended to rape him. Graham kicked Gacy in the face and freed himself from the handcuffs. A month later, Gacy appeared at Graham's bedroom door, intending to rape him, saying, "Dave, you really don't know who I am. Maybe it would be good if you give me what I want." Graham resisted, straddling Gacy, who left the bedroom, stating, "You ain't no fun." Graham moved out on October 5th and left PDM. Although he did periodically work for Gacy over the following 2 years. Shortly after Graham moved out of Gacy's house, another employee, 18-year-old Michael Rossi, moved in. Rossi had worked for PDM since May 1976. He lived with Gacy until April 1977. Rossi sometimes assisted Gacy in clouding at grand openings of businesses. Gacy as Pogo and Rossi as Patches. Politics. Gacy also entered local Democratic Party politics, initially offering use of his employees to clean party headquarters at no charge. He was rewarded for his community service with an appointment to serve on the Norwood Park Township Street Lighting Committee, subsequently earning the title of precinct captain. In 1975, Gacy was appointed director of Chicago's annual Polish Constitution Day Parade, an event he would supervise until 1978. Through his work with the parade, Gacy met and was photographed with First Lady Rosalynn Carter on May 6, 1978. The event later became an embarrassment to the United States Secret Service. In the pictures, Gacy is wearing an S-pin, indicating a person given special clearance. Murders. Gacy murdered at least 33 young men and boys and buried 26 of them in the crawl space of his house. His victims included people he knew and random individuals lured from Chicago's Greyhound bus station, Bughouse Square, or simply off the streets with the promise of a job with PDM, an offer of drink and or drugs or money for sex. Some victims were grabbed by force, others conned into believing Gacy, who often carried his sheriff's badge and had spotlights on his black Oldsmobile, was a policeman. Gacy usually lured a lone victim to his house, although on more than one occasion Gacy also had what he called doubles, 2 victims killed in the same evening. Inside Gacy's home, his usual modus operandi was to ply a youth with drink, drugs, or generally gain his trust. He would produce a pair of handcuffs to show a magic trick, sometimes as part of a clowning routine. He typically cuffed his own hands behind his back, then surreptitiously released himself with the key, which he hid between his fingers. He then offered to show his intended victim how to release himself from the handcuffs. With his victim manacled and unable to free himself, Gacy then made a statement to the effect of, "The trick is you have to have the key." Gacy Gacy referred to this act of restraining his victim as the handcuff trick. Having restrained his victim, Gacy proceeded to rape and torture his captive. He frequently began by sitting on or straddling himself above the victim's chest before forcing the victim to fillet him. Gacy then inflicted acts of torture, including burning with cigars, making his captive inmate imitate a horse as he sat on their back and pulled upon makeshift reins on their necks, and violation with foreign objects such as dildos and prescription bottles after he had sodomized his captive to immobilize his captive's legs. Before engaging in acts of torture, Gacy frequently manacled their ankles to a 2x4 with handcuffs attached to each end, an act inspired by the Houston mass murders. He is also known to have verbally taunted many of his victims throughout their continued abuse, and to have dragged or forced several victims to crawl into his bathroom, where he partly drowned them in the bathtub before repeatedly reviving them, enabling him to continue his prolonged assault. In instances when a victim had pleaded to be killed as opposed to continuing to endure torture, Gacy would make a statement to the effect he would kill his victim when he wanted to. Gacy typically murdered his victims by placing a rope tourniquet around their neck before progressively tightening the rope with a hammer handle. He referred to this act as the rope trick, frequently informing his captive this is the last trick. In one instance, he had read part of, I'm not sure how to say it, Psalm 23 as he tightened the rope around his victim's neck. Occasionally, the victim had convulsed for an hour or two before dying, although several victims died by asphyxiation from cloth gags stuffed deep into their throat. Except for his two final victims, all were murdered between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. After Gacy's death, Gacy usually stored the victims' bodies under his bed for up to 24 hours before burying his victim in the crawl space, where he periodically poured quicklime to hasten the decomposition of his victims. Some victims' bodies were taken to his garage and embalmed prior to their burial. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye.